the third set, Magic Ruler, or Spell Ruler as they changed the name to when they changed magic cards to spell cards, really upped the ante. It released a ridiculous number of power cards. Almost all of them were spell cards or magic cards, which makes sense based off of the set's name. Uh, and most of these cards have become banned because they're ridiculous. um, and so I'll just jump right into the set review with the honorable mentions. The first honorable mention is Relinquished. Relinquished is still a pretty solid card that you can play. And it has to obviously be in its own deck, in a Relinquished deck. Um, but you can use it to take control of one of your opponent's monsters and use it as a battle shield for your Relinquished. Um, Relinquished doesn't have protection against anything besides battle, so it's not as good as it could be if it did have other protection, but it's still a solid card that you can run a deck around. And then the next honorable mention is all of the recruiter battle recruiter monsters, such as Mystic Tomato and Giant Rat. There's one for each attribute. And for all of them, when they're destroyed by battle, you get to special summon a monster of the same attribute from your deck in attack position, and the monster that you summon has to have 1,500 or less attack. So these aren't nearly as good as they used to be, just because most monsters are not destroyed by battle anymore. Um, so they just it's easy for your opponent to play around them and to not set off their effects, but they're still worth mentioning. And so then we'll get into the top 10. So the 10th card is Messenger of Peace. Messenger of Peace is a very good stall card, and it's lasted better than the other old stall cards like Gravity Bind or Swords of Revealing Light. Messenger of Peace has actually gotten better, whereas the other two have gotten worse. Messenger of Peace can stop most of monsters that are played now from attacking. And all you have to do to keep it active is pay 100 life points, which is nothing. And you can also choose to destroy Messenger of Peace whenever you want, allowing yourself to attack. So it's a very good stall card. And then in ninth place, we have a card that's played in almost every deck now, Upstart Goblin. Upstart Goblin basically is just a way for you to play a smaller deck, because statistically it's essentially the same thing as having one less card in your deck. It has the downside of giving your opponent 1,000 life points, but that's not a very big downside. So most people play this now. And a card as good as Upstart Goblin being at ninth just goes to show you how strong the rest of the cards in the set are. In eighth place, we have a card that's banned. Almost all the cards left on this top 10 list are banned. In eighth place, we have Cyberjar. Cyberjar is a very unwieldy monster. It destroys all monsters on the field, which usually you can use to your advantage to destroy your opponent's monsters when they have good monsters that you want to get rid of, or a lot of monsters so you can generate advantage. And then both players draw 5 cards and then special summon all the monsters that are level 4 or lower, add the rest to their hand. So you could end up giving your opponent a lot of advantage if you give them good monsters off of Cyberjar and you get nothing off of Cyberjar. So it's unwieldy. That's the only reason it's not higher, because it can end up backfiring. But it's a very powerful monster, and it makes sense why it's banned. In seventh place, we have the last card on the list that is not banned. This card is actually at 3 right now. Mystical Space Typhoon. It's just the best spell trap removal card at the present moment that is not banned. Mystical Space Typhoon is very, very versatile, and you can use it in lots of different ways. It's a highly skilled card. You can easily misplay it, or you can use it to just cripple your opponent's strategy by using it at the right moment. and it's very good. Most people play it at 3 because it's just so effective against so many of the top decks at the moment. And then after that we get to the really ridiculous cards. All of the cards after this are never going to be unbanned just because they're too good. Sixth place we have Confiscation, the worst of the 3 cards that take cards away from your opponent's hand. Most of them discard, but not all of them. So there's 3 of them, and Confiscation is easily the worst. You get to look at your opponent's hand, which is nice. So you get to choose whichever is their best card. But then you discard it, so it goes to the grave. Sometimes this allows your opponent to reuse it. It also limits which cards you can hit. You can't like hit a Dragon Ruler, for example, because you're not doing anything by discarding it. But you get to know your opponent's hand, which is the best part about the Confiscation card. Knowing your opponent's hand allows you to play around whatever they might have. Playing Confiscation on turn 1 is really, really good. And then in 5th place, we have another hand disruption spell. It's a little bit better than Confiscation. It's Delinquent Duo. So this one is better because it hits 2 of your opponent's cards. The one thing that Confiscation has over Delinquent Duo is Confiscation allows you to see your opponent's hand. Delinquent Duo doesn't allow this. Your opponent will randomly discard 1 card, and then they choose another card to discard. So you don't get to see your opponent's hand, and you're also not hitting their best cards, most likely. So it's a free +1 that completely messes with your opponent's hand, but it's not. You don't get to see their opponent's hand, which is a downside to Delinquent Duo. And then the third and best hand disruption spell comes in at 4th place. The Forceful Sentry is definitely the best out of the hand disruptions, because you get to see your opponent's hand and choose the best one to get rid of, but you send it back to their deck, meaning they can't reuse it from the grave. So you could hit whatever you want, and your opponent will no longer have access to it. And you're not limited because you can choose cards that are good when they're in the graveyard. So the Forceful Sentry is a crazy card. It's just way too good. And so the top 3 cards after that are all also ridiculous cards. They don't hit your opponent's hand like the past 3 did, but they do other crazy things that just shouldn't be allowed to do. So in 3rd place we have Giant Trunade, which is one of the better field clearing cards. It returns all spell and trap cards on the field to the hand, which allows you to OTK because your opponent will no longer have traps to stop you on the field. It also is harder to play around for your opponent because things like Starlight Road or the Huge Revolution is over won't be able to stop Giant Trunade from activating, whereas they could stop Heavy Storm, for example. And Giant Trunade is also ridiculous in that you can send used face-up continuous cards to your hand. Things like Call of the Haunted or Fiendish Chain can end up sitting on your field without effect, and then you can send them back to your hand with Giant Trunade and reuse them later. Giant Trunade is just bonkers. It can do so many crazy things. And then in 2nd place we have arguably the craziest control stealer card. We have Snatch Steal. Snatch Steal, you get to take control of one of your opponent's monsters permanently, and the only downside is that they get 1,000 life points every standby phase, which is pretty much nothing. Life point costs don't really matter when you're doing something as powerful as stealing your opponent's monster, and you can do whatever you want with it with Snatch Steal. The major downside to Snatch Steal is your opponent can stop it with Mystical Space Typhoon. That's really the only reason it's not as good as like Change of Heart, for example. Because Snatch Steal is permanent, you can just leave it on your field. You don't have to use it as XC material or something like you would with some of the other control stealers. And you don't have to finish them off that turn either, because you just keep the monster. Uh, and Snatch Steal is also searchable from your deck with Hidden Armory. So you could run just one Snatch Steal and 3 Hidden Armories, and then you basically have 4 copies of Snatch Steal in your deck. So Hidden Armory makes it so any equipped spell cards that do something like Snatch Steal or Premature Burial just become even more ridiculous. And then in first place we have one of the most ridiculous cards ever made. Some people would argue it's the best card ever, and it's definitely got a strong argument for that. First place we have Painful Choice. Painful Choice, you choose 5 cards from your deck, and then your opponent chooses one of them to go to your hand, and the rest go to your graveyard. So essentially, what you're doing is you're choosing 5 cards from your deck, and you're putting them in play. Because cards in your graveyard are often almost as good as cards in your hand. You can send like wolves from your deck to your grave with this and special summon them. You can send Mizukis to special summon other zombies from your graveyard. You can send dragon rulers, and then you have all of your dragon rulers available to you because you can send all 4 of them plus another card. It's just Painful Choice is way too good of a setup card. It's probably the best setup card ever. You can use it to just create a perfect grave almost with whatever cards you want to send from your deck to the grave. And it's just gotten more and more powerful over time. So that was the top 10 best cards in Magic or Spell Ruler. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to check out some of my other stuff.